Hello.
Hey,
I'm
there
not
we
sure what
are.
that quirk was all about, but I will be right. Ooh, look at that.
Oh,
What
that's
is going
frightening.
on there?
That is frightening.
I figured since we're doing 80s and I've just rewatched the entire Predator series, this was perfect. I can't say I look like the Predator, but it's creepy all the same. And if I get sick of this at some point, I could always go to the other thing I'm going to talk about, which is this.
Oh my.
Crew.
Yeah, crew.
Party on, guys.
Party on, Sal.
Party on,
Rock.
Sal.
Rock on.
Rock
Well,
on.
Well, welcome, POJCasters, to another episode of the Party on Johncast. Most excellent podcast covering theology, music, and whatever we're drinking, and whatever we want to talk about. This is Reverend Angel of Death, aka Reverend Sal, a minister of Word and Sacrament in the PCUSA in the validated ministry of hospice chaplaincy.
This is the rockin' and sometimes creepy Reverend Todd Laddick, who is coming to you in thermal Technicolor. And I am an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church of Greater New Jersey, serving a church in Newton, New Jersey, on higher ground from somebody south of us.
And I am the Viking Vicar, formerly of Rock Island, Illinois, and South Park Presbyterian Church. South Park Presbyterian no longer exists. Rock Island does, but now we are located on top of the hill in Parma, Ohio. Fun fact, the same town that the Drew Carey show took place in.
Cool. I just realized did you all hear me speak?
Yes.
Like that
Yeah.
came through good? Cool.
Yeah.
I realized I didn't even have my microphone in front of me. I'm just sitting here talking like, ooh.
Yeah,
Cool.
we're good.
We're good. So we do have a special guest with us, and we are a University of Dubuque Theological Seminary heavy podcast this month, with three of us on the show. Sorry, Todd.
That's okay.
so
I'm from Dubuque in spirit.
That's right.
Before I became Methodist, that might have been my way, you know.
I've never
Well, the
heard
Methodist-
anybody describe
Methodist is,
themselves as such.
Yeah, UDTS is half Methodist. You would have fit in just
That's
fine.
right.
I would have fit in fine as a Methodist there, but I'm just saying I grew up Presbyterian. So, you know, if I had stayed
Yeah.
Presbyterian, probably Princeton, but still, you never know.
Yeah.
There you go. So we have the rockin' Reverend Dr. Chris with us. So Chris, introduce yourself.
Well, greetings to all. My name's Chris Doyle. I'm a PCUSA pastor. I graduated from Dubuque, of course, as Sal and Pastor Blake did. And I'm serving a couple small churches in New Jersey currently, very close to Newton. So we are kind of the largest Dubuque contingent, I think, on the East Coast right here with
Probably.
another Dubuque pastor up in Sparta.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I'm just thrilled to be here.
Yeah, you folks from Dubuque are you know, pretty rocking folks. So I have nothing against the seminary, except that it's in Iowa. But you know,
It
I
is a
won't-
pretty big.
I
pretty
just
big draw there.
anybody listening to us from Iowa is probably like now like ending their
No,
subscription.
they get it. They get
We-
They
it.
get it. They get
We
it.
love you from Iowa. It's not that we don't love the people. You know, it's just Iowa.
Well,
Anyway.
well, one of our claims to fame was the Field of Dreams
There you go.
was filmed partially at our seminary.
Oh,
So-
cool. I did not know that. Cool.
The library scenes where he's doing his research was filmed at the claim to fame.
Rock on. Yeah, so that's awesome.
I think
Yeah,
it's,
so that guess that brings us to our most. No, that doesn't bring us
Nope.
there. My God, I'm
Nope.
messing this up. Well, it brings us to our segment. Messed up
guys.
edition.
Yeah,
that's
so,
okay. So how do you guys know that God loves coffee?
How?
so
She wrote about it in the book of Hebrews. But I know I said I was going
Oh.
to stop doing that, but I can't stop doing
I really like that that Predator Todd was screaming when Sal said that joke.
I know.
It was perfect.
I actually think it's a really good one, Sal. I
Thank you.
enjoy
Thank you.
that.
it. Well,
It
Chris,
is.
you don't.
It's, you keep going back to it, you know.
It's solid.
Well, I mean, Chris doesn't have to listen to it every month, so
This is
There
true.
you
Every month for how long have we been going now? Like 3-4 years, something like that.
almost 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah, something like that. So okay, who wants to go first? What y'all drinking?
Why don't we let our guest go first?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I'm going with coffee.
Perfect. Any type?
For years now, actually, the only coffee that I will drink is Starbucks Sumatra,
Ooh,
and
that is a good one.
I either make it with a French press and let it sit extra long so that it gets good and strong, or I've discovered the way to make it strong in the Keurig, in which I use 2 of the pods and set it all the way to iced coffee, but I don't obviously put ice into it. And so I end up with 2 pods, a very small amount of very strong coffee, and then I'll put my milk into it.
You really
Awesome.
are a Gen Xer.
Yes, yes. So he is. There's no doubt about that. Chris's Gen X credentials are well established.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that Gen X that maybe you don't know about me, I was born in August of 1969, which is right at the peak middle of Gen X definitions. And I was born the weekend of the Woodstock concert.
Oh
Mhm.
my.
So that really kind of shouts it out. I was not born at the Woodstock concert, although I was raised in Woodstock. So,
Awesome. You were
Nice.
raised in Woodstock.
mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Yes,
Cool.
I have these memories, these very scant memories of being in the supermarket with my mother, and there being topless women walking up and down the aisles, pushing their carts. Yeah, Woodstock was a very, very funny place in the 70s and early 80s.
Interesting.
Have you guys watched the documentary on Woodstock '99 on Netflix?
Not yet, but I
Dude.
very vividly remember it.
I-
Dude,
Yeah, it was a nightmare.
it was insane.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't seen it, but I didn't even know that they did something on Netflix about it. But my father still complains about it.
Oh yeah, it was.
As well he should.
He should. Yeah.
It was
It was
about
awesome.
2 miles from their house.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just absolutely insane. Every local avoided the area where they
Oh.
were having that concert.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just it was a moneymaker. It was the complete opposite of what Woodstock should be and what Woodstock originally was.
But you know
Well-
what? I will say that some wonderful things came out of that concert. Locally, the site that they were going to be that they were having the concert on, it had been scheduled to be they were going to turn it into a town dump,
Mhm.
because it was right off the thruway and it would be easy to be a regional dump, and they were going to have a massive incinerator there and the whole thing. And the town folk were literally just up in arms. And then when they announced that they were going to be having the concert there, which was some years later, it ended up really cementing in place that they could not do any such thing with that property, like a dump or something. And now some locals just bought all of that Winston Farm area and are developing it into a real, they're putting in housing, they're putting in lots of commercial space, they're really developing it in a way that will really benefit the community. And so that, probably would not have happened if the concert had not taken place there. So there are some benefits that come out of that.
And that's true, I think, of a lot of ill-fated situations and bad things, like not that you want to minimize the pain or the injustice of the bad thing, because that is one separate issue, but there are things that follow from bad things that tend to be good. So there is the bad and the good that happen in those situations. But yeah, I want to watch that documentary because that's like yesterday to me. I remember as a kid wanting to go. Well, I wasn't a kid, I was in high school. I was like a sophomore, junior in high school when Woodstock 94 happened. And that was an awesome concert and turned out to be a mudfest like the original one. And then they tried to follow it up with 99, but 99 was nothing like 94 and certainly nothing like 69. I mean,
Oh, hold on. So maybe it was 94 that I'm thinking about.
That you're thinking.
It was 94 that where it was at the Winston Farm.
Yeah, because it was at a decommissioned air base.
The base.
Oh, okay.
Just like what?
Nothing but tarmac and like it's like 100 degrees you got to watch it. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
I will have to go and look that up for sure.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking, so I'll keep talking.
Yes. Back to our coffee.
Drinking, Nespresso. My brother got my entire family Nespresso machines back in 2011. We thought it was a nice gift. Ultimately, it was just because he wanted to make sure he could have the coffee he wanted if he came to visit anybody. So
there is no true altruism, is there?
My brother's born in 72, right in the heart of Gen X. So that's what I'm drinking. It's decaf because I've been awake since 2:30 in the morning, and so I've already had enough coffee to end somebody's life. So I'm trying to be responsible at this point. But then the little bonus thing is this hot sauce. Heartbeat hot sauce, dill pickle serrano.
Ooh.
And it's by a company called Heartbeat Hot Sauce out of Thunder Bay, Ontario. And they just make incredible hot sauces. And this stuff, like we put it on hot dogs, we put it on burgers, we put it on basically everything. I've got it on some chicken nuggets right now. It's awesome. It's not too hot, but it definitely lets you know that it's there. I'm not going to like just straight up drink it because that would be ridiculous, but I would. It's that good that I would do it.
I would do it.
We're big hot sauce heads in this house. We actually just we're heading to Alaska next week. We have another baby coming into the family, and we ordered the Hot Ones season 18 lineup and sent it to Alaska so that we can do a full rundown of the hot sauces from the weakest to the unbelievably hottest.
I love the unbelievably hottest.
Oh my gosh.
I live in that zone.
Yeah. Have you had the bomb?
I have not had the bomb. I've had down South Carolina in a town called Helen, Georgia. There's a place called the Pepper Palace, and it's a similar thing where they go from the weakest to the hottest. Yep. So I brought that home, and they have this like pepper like shake seasoning that has all sorts of like ridiculously hot peppers in there that I shake onto my sandwiches every day. So love it. Plus those like like 10 million Schofield like I think once you get past like once you get into the millions of Schofield and then the tens of millions, it just becomes like it doesn't matter.
Well, it's no longer real. Like you can't get them that high naturally. So what I'm going to do at some point is I'm going to send you and Sal and Chris, if you would like one, to experience this at some point. a bottle of the Bomb Beyond Insanity,
Yeah.
and we will have a discussion about does hell exist on one of these shows.
If you send that, let's do it. I'll do
And
it.
then we will take this sauce after we state our opinions, take this sauce, and I think your opinion will change.
So does this mean we have to invite Chris back for this episode? I think we
Chris,
do.
would you like to come back for the does hell exist conversation?
Yeah, I would love to come back anytime, but I will tell you that I am not a hot sauce person in any way, shape, or form. My entire family laughs at me. My mother-in-law, she used to sit and just eat hot peppers, just eat
Oh,
them,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
just eat them. And both of my kids really like hot sauce as does my wife. And I have the weakest palate for hot sauce that you can possibly imagine. My wife will make something and she'll put, whatever into it to spice it up, and I'll be eating and sitting and sweating, and everybody's looking at me saying, what on earth is wrong with you?
Got you.
All right. Well, for your safety, then you can be in the control group.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll be in the control group.
You'll be the
We gotta have you
control.
back on.
But I'm telling you, man, there is nothing like this.
Okay, I'm game. Are you game, Sal?
I'm game. I
All
mean,
right.
Alice and I just planted some peppers this spring for Calvin, and unbeknownst to us, we inadvertently planted hot peppers. So
The hottest
I love
pepper that you
I
can
love
get
them, but
naturally is habanero. That's the hottest you can get naturally. Everything after that has been crossbred to some degree or another, and it just gets ridiculous, like the
It's out of
Carolina
control,
Reaper.
yeah, well, we could have a discussion about the Holy Spirit at some point, and we
Yeah.
can all have some ghost sauce.
Holy Ghost. Yeah. I love it.
It'll be good.
Oh, we
It'll
gotta
be
do
good.
this. This is
Yeah.
on.
Well, for Blake and for Sal, did you ever guys go to the hot sauce store, the sauce store in Galena?
It never did. No.
It's an entire store of just hot sauces. I mean, and they have jellies and jams and things like that too. But we used to go in there, and my kids would just sit there and try whatever hot sauce they could, get their fingers on. I would just smell it, and the inside of my nose would be burning. So
I remember going there.
You need to stay as far away from the Bomb Beyond Insanity as you can, Chris.
Okay,
I
so that'll get mailed to the three of us, and Chris can watch us cry. Basically, is how
and
that's
I
gonna
will
work.
laugh. And I will
And
laugh.
laugh. Yes,
As well you should, because it's a very dumb thing to do, and yet I keep on doing it.
we gotta do it. This is great. So, Sal, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking Starbucks Nitro Cold Brew with sweet cream. I
Nitro.
decided to get away from the Death Swill this month. So
The
Dunkin'
swirly
Donuts.
death swill.
Well, I've been trying to drink decaf because, well, my doctor told me to for my blood pressure. Now that Allison is no longer pregnant and back to drinking coffee, she decided, let's go back to decaf. So we have Dunkin' decaf in the house at all times. That's our every morning coffee. So I figured, let's change it up this morning.
Mhm.
And
As somebody who suffers from, anxiety, coffee has become a no-no for me. I do drink. I can't say I don't drink caffeine, because I will have a Dunkin' Donuts refresher or a Starbucks refresher, but I have been avoiding coffee because it causes my heart to do weird things. It causes my stomach to go into knots, and it's just like, why am I doing this to myself? I do not need to be doing this to myself. So, not that I won't have a coffee here or there, but I just have fallen out of drinking it. So,
well, I did get kind of a very gentle, polite hand slap by my doctor this last visit, because I said I do drink a couple cups of decaf every day. And she said, okay, but you realize there's a bit of caffeine in that. I said, please don't ruin it for me.
yes, there is. Just like non-alcoholic beers are technically not non-alcoholic, but they are virtually non-alcoholic. Same thing with it's so small. I doubt that if you were that sensitive to caffeine, you'd have a whole other world of problems. So I guess that brings it to me. I am drinking Angry Eric And of course, I got to put my hand behind this.
Oh, there
I'm
you go.
drinking Angry Eric, and that is it's called Fjord Crosser, and it is a Belgian styled India Pale Ale,
Mm,
and it
that
is
sounds.
beautiful.
I can smell the hops from here.
Yeah,
Taste-
and the Belgian,
Taste the bitterness.
the Belgian wheat, like it actually kind of mellows out the bitterness a bit, but the bitterness is still there. So it's just like a really neat like cross between a Belgian and an IPA. So that's what I'm having.
Excellent.
I'm pulling an early day today. So I guess that ends our extended, really, Hebrews segment. And so that brings us to our most excellent 80s segment. '80s edition.
Get up to me.
Okay, which means that it is also time for me to get rid of, say, this creepy predator style, thing here, and we'll just go to something a little more crew.
Nice.
Yeah. Dr. Feelgood. Okay, so who wants to go first? This is an anything 80s segment, so we can talk about our favorite 80s music, our favorite 80s whatever.
Well, mine is a crossover. It touches on two genres. One of my all-time, what I think is one of the best playlists you can get on Spotify right now is called 80s Training Montage.
Ooh.
And it's just a collection of songs from 80s movies during training montages, and it's awesome.
Oh, like Rocky training and
Rocky training, and there's like Iron
yes.
Eagle is on there, and some Huey Lewis in the news. Like it is every training montage that you are thinking of when I say that from an 80s movie, that song is on there. And it's tremendous. And so that came to mind as I set out on a 60-mile bike ride last Saturday. And how many of those training montages had somebody on a bike with somebody running after them, punching the air or something like that. And so the first leg of this 60-mile bike ride that I did with the 80s training montage, and I'm pretty sure it set me up for success that day.
Awesome.
Did it include Chariots of Fire?
It did include Chariots of Fire, indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, that has to be there.
Push It to the Limit, Iron Eagle, a song from Rad was on there.
Anything from Flashdance?
Yes, the Flashdance
Yes.
song. Holding Out for a Hero was on there.
Oh,
It
God.
is like a guaranteed good start to the day playlist. I found it when I was coaching CrossFit in Colorado, and as coach, you're in control of the radio. And so the day after I discovered it, I walked in and put this on, and it became the Friday morning playlist for like 6 months. They just loved it. So I can't recommend it high enough. It is the best like random playlist you will come across on Spotify right now. No question.
That's awesome. Well, I guess I'll go. You can see what I have behind me. Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood album, which I believe, there's a lot of good Crue. But I believe Dr. Feelgood is like their height, and I just, that album had so many good songs on it. Virtually no fillers on it. It was just like one solid album that just, and it was in an era that was like kind of a weird time for Crue, because Nikki Sixx had OD'd on heroin and had to go to rehab and cleaned his life up. Vince Neil was trying, to not drink after getting into an accident and killing hit the passenger in his car. So like they were trying to straighten themselves up, and yet they're putting out like the greatest, like probably one of the greatest 80s metal band albums of the 80s. I really do think that this album's one of the best. I don't know if I'd call it the best because there's other really great ones, but this album is so solid. And I think of like Same Old Situation, SOS, and I think of Home Sweet Home, Dr. Feelgood, of course. I mean, there's just so many good songs off this album that to me it is just, obviously I could talk about Bon Jovi and go into them, everybody knows that, but Motley Crue is just they're up there for me. And I actually, what brought them back to the forefront, because I hadn't listened to them in quite a while, was I rewatched The Dirt on Netflix. Have any of you seen that about Crue? If you
Actually,
haven't
pretty
seen
good
The
movie.
Dirt, it is a great movie for adults because we are talking about Crue here, and they don't sugarcoat anything. I mean, they just don't. Like, Tommy Jones running around naked in the hallway. Yep, they showed Tommy Jones running away around naked in the hallway. And by the way, Machine Gun Kelly plays him in that film, and he is excellent, man. He looks just like him, acts just like him, just great. And I also watched Pam and Tommy on Hulu, which is about the Pam and Tommy sex tape scandal, which was very eye-opening, and the damage that did not only to their relationship, but especially to her. She really was an innocent victim in all of that. And not to say that Tommy wasn't, because it was their marriage, their video. But he's a man, and the reaction people are going to have to his big, what, is a lot different than they're going to have to her. And, and that was made very clear throughout this film. So I think it's actually an important show to watch. It's limited. It's one season and done, and worthwhile. So that is the Crue end of it. But I also want to talk about the film, The Predator, which I have been watching. I rewatched the series, and the reason I rewatched the series is I noticed that they came out with a new film. I'll go back to this. They came out with a new film called Prey on Hulu. I don't know if anybody has seen it yet.
I saw the commercials for it.
Yeah, it is. Honestly, I can't ever place anything above the original. The original with Arnold was just phenomenal. And I watched it. It's really not even dated to this date. I mean, you watch it and it works in our time as it worked back then, minus a few technological things. Other than that,
isn't it a prequel?
It is a prequel.
Yeah.
So this, I think, is the best installment of the series, short of the original. And I really put it up on par with the original. And the reason why is they went 300 years ago to the time where the French were coming, from Canada down into North US, what would be US, what wasn't then. And they were doing the fur trapping and the bison shooting and all of that. And their first encounters really with the Comanche. And so they really brought Comanche folk from the nation to consult with, and did their homework and really showed the Comanche tribe and its culture as it would have been in that time, the way they would have thought of their women, because this is focusing on a woman who wants to be a hunter, and that was really not a thing, in that tribe. And so they did their homework, and they put together this really phenomenal anthropological film, and then dumped the Predator in it. And the Predator becomes the prey in the end. Yep. And it's really cool. It's just a cool film.
They did a good job. It was actually got a lot of praise for they use an indigenous cast. So it's all, whether they're all Comanche, I don't know, but I do know they all are indigenous, other than the French Canadian trappers.
Yeah, other than the ones who would not have been indigenous, right?
Yeah. So it's a really good movie.
Yeah. So it's great film. And the other thing I liked, they do not translate the French. They have the French speak in French. And when you have the subtitles come up, they're just putting the French up there. You cannot read what it says. And what I love about that is that's exactly what it would have been like for a Comanche person who crosses paths with these weird people with these weird weapons who are speaking in a weird language, and you have no clue what they're saying to you. And the fear that would produce. And you feel it as you're watching. You're like, wait, what are they saying? I can't understand. It's like, and I thought that was really brilliant the way they did that.
Yep.
So they do have them speak in Comanche, but mostly it's in English. So you get to hear a little bit of Comanche, but then they put it in English as if you're hearing Comanche kind of. That's how they handle that. But the way they handle outsiders from the Comanche in their own languages, I mean, it was really brilliant.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep. So that's my pick. Those are my picks. I'll get this creepy thing off again. Sorry.
I'll go next. My pick is, I had a hard time with this, but I just came back to what I've been kind of had on repeat lately. And I just recently watched the latest season of Stranger Things, season 4.
And that is 80s, even though
It
it's
is
not.
80s to the max.
It is.
And my choice is not Metallica, which was the big hit of the season. It's actually Kate Bush, Running Up That Hill, which is a song that I've always loved. Actually reintroduced to it with Placebo did a cover of it that was used by the History Channel 11 years ago when they did a special on Gettysburg. So when
And what was the name of the song again?
Running Up That Hill.
Running Up That Hill. Okay.
Yeah, by Kate Bush.
Mhm.
So in not to give too much away of Stranger Things, but one of the characters' favorite songs that it becomes a lifesaver is "Running Up That Hill" by Kate Bush. And I found a couple of really good metal covers of it. So it's been on repeat on YouTube. There's a Bardcore. I don't know if you guys have heard of Bardcore. It's exactly what it sounds like if you think of medieval instruments playing modern rock and heavy metal songs.
Yeah.
So look up Bardcore, Running Up That Hill.
Okay.
I think I always related to the song just in case I don't have the lyrics with me, but kind of it's very much about relationships and, you know, if I only could make a deal with God and trade places type thing. Sometimes I feel like that's ministry.
Right.
That's my song.
Awesome.
My backup was Tears for Fears, but because my first ever concert in the 80s was Tears for Fears with the Sowing the Seeds of Love tour.
Awesome.
And when would that have been? Like when would you have gone to that concert?
I was in 5th grade, so 1989.
5th grade. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. My sister wanted to go, so my dad took me and my sister.
Yep. Rock on.
All right, Chris, your turn.
I'm not really sure quite how to respond. I mean, when it comes to music and thinking about the 80s, I mean, I've always been a really big Fleetwood Mac fan.
Yep.
And then in the 80s, you know, they broke up and Christine McVie and Stevie Nicks went off and were doing their own thing. And I think that they produced some really great stuff by themselves. And
that's
so, I mean,
totally 80s.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the music that I listen to is really 70s into 80s. And when it came to, I mean, I remember in high school, and you know, there were the certain segments of kids who were into Motley Crue and Twisted Sister and all of these groups, and I could never listen to them. And I think that probably has a lot to do with my mother, because my mother was always the controller of the radio.
Oh, forget it.
And
that's not what she was listening to.
Not on your life would she listen to.
Nor
So
were
I mean,
my parents.
You know, throughout that period of time, we were, listening to the radio that was kind of bringing up a lot of the 70s stuff. But then if it was 80s stuff, it was things like The Gambler by Kenny Rogers and
Kenny Rogers,
ABBA.
yep.
And,
I
you know,
remember that
and
because
the-
that's what my dad listened to.
Yeah,
I remember The Gambler.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that I kind of grew up listening to and can still sing all of the words to.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to music, I end up being a little bit lame when it comes to music, and when it comes to sports also. I mean, just the two
Fair
things I never really dove into head first as so many others did.
How about 80s movies? Anything there?
80s movies. Oh.
Or some weird story from the 80s you can think of that you remember? We'll make this very broad.
Make this very, very broad. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I mean, I remember we had to go and see E.T. 5 times.
Oh,
because
E.T., there you go.
My
There you
father,
go.
my father,
I remember seeing that
he
in the
will
theater.
still sit and watch E.T.
Mhm.
And I don't understand why.
Yeah, no, I have a nostalgic love for it, but I can't say I've watched it in the last 20 years. But I remember my parents taking us to see that in the theater. I don't even know. Yeah, what year did that come out?
I don't
Trying to
know. I
think if
was
my
in high
sister was
school
there or
though.
not.
I was in high school, and I remember I had a date with my girlfriend. We went to the theater and she wanted to see E.T. So we went and we saw E.T. And I remember there were a number of girls there. At the end of the film, they're coming out crying, and I was just like, what?
My sister was a toddler and my parents brought her and I. That's
Yeah.
right. My memory serves me correct. Yep.
Yeah, I very clearly remember the feds in whites in hazmats and all that. Like, that's the only thing I
Yeah.
really remember from that movie, because I think I was 4.
And I
Yeah.
remember relating to it because at that same time, I'm trying to think, I was around 4 at that time. At that same time, I was in and out of the hospital and actually had at some point had a viral infection in my bloodstream and almost killed me. So like that scene where Elliot is in this bed with the covers over it, like that was what it looked like in the bed that I was in, and I remember that. So that always like kind of brought up, I guess, anxiety. I wouldn't have really thought of it at that time, but it was something I related to, not in a pleasant way, and I'll always remember that scene from that film because of that. Yeah, I remember that's one of my earliest memories of seeing E.T. in the theater.
So as we kind of wrap this up, the movie that I think bridges the millennials like me, the early millennials, and the Xers together is The Never-Ending Story.
Oh, yeah.
And a friend of mine posted, like, I am from the generation that watched The Never-Ending Story and learned that you can die from being sad.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Like
the Never-Ending Story was a Gen X production. I mean, the people who worked on that story and who made that film were no doubt, were no doubt in that mindset as they were making
the swamp of sadness, and just like, oh man.
Probably some boomers in there too, but still, no, that's Never-Ending Story. Wow, I remember that too.
Oh.
And I remember the Never-Ending Story too with Jonathan Brandis, who's no longer with us, sadly.
Oh, that's right.
He killed himself. Yeah. Well, on that note,
let's talk about Gen X.
Let's talk about Gen X. Okay, so yeah. Sal, why don't you introduce our guest?
So part of the reason we brought on Chris is Chris just finished his doctoral work around the issue of Gen X in the church. I'll let him describe it because I'm sure he could describe it a lot better than I could. But he studied and looked at and researched the role of, or the lack of Gen X in the church. and how that's affecting church growth, church just in general. I think the four of us are probably the oddity of all being Gen Xers or Zennials who are in the church and leaders in the church, because that's not typical of Gen X. So, and on that note, please correct anything I messed up, Chris.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on this.
Oh, this is exciting.
It's kind of exciting, yeah.
It's overdue.
Yeah.
But a good occasion for it to be overdue.
Definitely. Yeah, what I looked at was, well, let me start out by saying, having grown up in the church, I grew up Roman Catholic and was very, very much tied to the church, altar boy. My mother was a CCD teacher. My grandfather was a sexton, the whole 9 yards. And when I went to college, I basically ran to college because one of the things I really wanted to get away from was the church. Because I was the kid that was always volunteered for anything that was needed at the church. Oh, Chris will do it. And so that really annoyed me. But the bigger issues that I had with the church when I was younger, I always tell the story. I remember in 8th grade, we had earth science, and Mrs. Bishop was talking about, fossils and dinosaurs and all of these great things. And I went to our priest and I said, Father, why aren't dinosaurs written about in the Bible? And he looked at me and he said, if it's not in the Bible, it's not true. And I looked at him and I was like, but how can we deny bones? We have their bones. And he looked at me over his glasses and he said, if it's not in the Bible, it's not true.
I was just talking about this to somebody.
It just blew my mind and really started this questioning process in my head. And I think that it was that attitude that affected so many people in my generation, because the leadership in the church at that time, they were still either silent generation or even earlier baby boomers. And so they had this very absolutism type of attitude toward faith and not questioning anything. And my generation in the 70s and then into the 80s, education itself was just changing so dramatically.
You questioned everything.
And questioning absolutely everything. And so this absolutism just did not work for us. And so many of us, and really, over 80% of Gen Xers were raised in the church, but almost all of them left. Okay, today, PCUSA has about 14% of their membership is Gen X, whereas about 65% is baby boomer or silent generation, which really brings the question up of where is the church going to be in 10 years, if not mass closings. And so this is a massive problem. Millennials represent about 22% of the population. Everything else is boomers and silent generation, mainly boomers at this point. And so when I went to seminary, I'd been working in the mission field in the Middle East for a dozen years. And so when I went to Dubuque and went to seminary and then started doing guest preaching in some of the local churches out there, I really started thinking to myself, why are there no 40-year-olds here? There was nobody, absolutely no one. And so this question really started dogging at me. And then when we moved to New Jersey, we came to New Jersey in 2011. It was the same exact thing. I was serving this church that sat 350 people comfortably. It was a massive sanctuary, big church. And there were maybe 3 or 4 Gen Xers. And even their commitment was very sketchy almost all of the time. And so when I started doing my doctorate work, this kind of seemed to be the natural question that I really wanted to kind of get into and look at, and really found some interesting things in that, Gen X, we know the church because we were raised in it, but then we walked away from it en masse for a handful of reasons. But we are extremely spiritually hungry. Over 80% of us will absolutely say that we believe in God and that we believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, but we don't want anything to do with the church. Because during the 80s, and I don't know if you guys remember these things, but I was, finishing high school when Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were, going through everything that they
remember
were
that
going
scandal.
through, and Jimmy Swaggart was crying at the pulpit about
Yep,
needing forgiveness and all of this stuff.
remember it.
And all of these things combined with the change in education and the change in technology, I mean, for me, I remember very, very well as a senior in high school, my advisor saying, you really should take this new class that we're offering in computers. And so, I took the class in computers, and listening to the teacher trying to explain DOS, trying not to fall asleep in it, as most of the students were in the same situation. And so trying to grapple with all of this new technology that was coming out, growing up in a time when suddenly everything was going toward a mega mall versus Main Street, and TV changing. I remember when we got cable, it was like the biggest thing that everybody was talking about on the school bus, because all of our existence had been
Antennas.
4 TV channels.
Yep, I remember like there were 13 channels, and it was I remember my grandfather had the old dial TV.
Yeah, of course he did.
Yeah,
I
I remember when cable became a thing.
So, I mean, we got cable in 1982.
Mhm.
And it was a revolution. It was an absolute revolution. So I mean, between the technology, the media, and politically speaking, when Reagan was elected, people did not know or realize at that point. My father was always a massive fan of Reagan. He thought Ronald Reagan was just awesome. And today he realizes that really wasn't the case. But Reagan just did such an incredible amount of damage, really. Just so much, and for my generation especially, to the Department of Education, absolutely tore it apart. After Jimmy Carter had really expanded it and built it back up, and that ended up bringing on, in part, brought on the massive amount of cost that was soon to become lifelong student debt for my generation.
Correct.
That's
where that all started. Yep.
Yeah. And so, Gen X ended up becoming the first generation that was going to have to deal with the lifelong debt because of wanting to go to school.
And I have it. Yeah.
I was just talking with the property manager here at the church yesterday, and we're talking about the whole Biden taking away $10,000 from, student debt and this and that. And I said to him, I was like, I think that that's great. Okay. But realize that, for those of us who have $200,000 in student debt, okay.
10,000 ain't doing much.
Well, 10,000 isn't.
It's still
very
good.
Much,
it's
but
still
you know
good.
what? The principal that I took out was $60,000.
Correct.
But I have over $200,000 in debt
From
because of the interest. And so
Yep.
you're taking away $10,000. Nobody has to pay for that.
Yeah.
Nobody's paying that $10,000. They're just taking out some of the interest that they're going to,
That's all
So,
they're doing. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that point in the 80s and everything that kind of happened between the 70s and the 80s, from the Iran hostage crisis, where we were all tying yellow bows around every tree in our yard, to the Iran-Contra scam. I mean, all of these things had such an incredible effect on us as a generation that it helped us to not just turn away from the church, but turn away from so much in society, and became a pretty cynical group.
Yeah.
And
cynicism, I would say, is
pretty
the
much-
heart of the group.
Oh yeah, and it has remained that way. But the thing is that now today we are getting to a point where, once you enter your 50s, you really start thinking about mortality.
Oh yeah.
And you really start thinking about legacy. And because we don't have toddlers that we're running after, or diapers to change, or playing the chauffeur to our kids really anymore, because they're all up and out and driving themselves, suddenly now these topics become much heavier in our minds. And the church is the perfect thing that can really help to address some of those issues. But we need to be invited back into the church.
Right. In an authentic way, though.
In an
Right.
authentic way, which is going to require the churches who are, and the people who are mainly boomers, who are still there to understand the situation of Generation X.
Mhm.
Because we're not going to walk back into the church feeling like we're misunderstood still. Our opinions and values and viewpoints don't really matter because the boomers are the ones that are in charge and they're going to do everything the way they want it anyway.
Mhm.
So there's just a massive issue here. But the thing is that if the church were to reach out and really try to put some effort into this, I think that it would be massively beneficial to the church as a whole. When I started doing this research, I called Louisville to the church center, and I asked who I could speak with that handles outreach specifically to younger people. And I was told, well, there is an office that does outreach to millennials. And I said, okay, can I speak to that person? And so I spoke to that person who just happened to be a Gen Xer born in 1970. And I said, what is it that the church is doing to reach out to Gen X if there's an actual office that's opened to reach out to millennial? And he just started laughing and he said, absolutely nothing.
No. And the funny thing is the church is outreaching to millennials when millennials are a thing of the past in a way, sort of. I mean, they're now, but you've got this upcoming generation and other generations coming up. And it seems like we outreach behind the 8 ball, rather than ahead of it. And
oh yeah, the church is the most reactive institution ever.
right, we let people go and then we react. Right,
we're reacting now because we're looking around and seeing our pews are empty and our coffers are emptying, and we need somebody to save the thing that we love, the building, the space, the whatever it is. But one of the things that's happening at the congregation I'm serving is it's a massive building, massive. They also have unobligated memorials that they don't know what to do with that are larger than the entire budget of the entire church that I previously served.
That's a good problem to have. In a way.
The first thing I said to one of the people, I was like, tell me if I'm wrong on this. I want to be wrong about this. This church is going to run out of people before it runs out of money. And they said, oh no, that's 100% true. They got all the money in the world, but they're now realizing, oh, we don't have, we don't have any kids. Where are all the kids? Because
where are their parents?
They didn't care until they decided they didn't want to do it anymore. Now it's like, okay, where are you? Get back here. We need you. But they,
But there is reasoning behind that. Most likely all of the people that you're talking to at your church who are questioning this are baby boomers.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And the thing is that back in the mid to late 80s, and then obviously through the 90s and beyond, those baby boomers who were doing all of the work of the church, and generally speaking still are, okay, they gave up on their kids because their kids were just like, you're not getting me to go to church, so just stop.
That's exactly what happened.
They gave up on their kids, but then they turn around and say, well, maybe we can get our grandkids.
That's exactly what happened.
And so that's why there ended up being this massive focus on millennials, because it was the baby boomers thinking, well, if we can just get our grandkids back into the church.
Right.
And there's always been this attitude, if we can get the kids and get them into Sunday school, we're going to build this foundation that will make them stay. Well, they did that with us. They built the foundation, but we didn't stay. Because they didn't realize that the church of their church that they grew up and born and raised in was not the church that was going to be able to answer questions for their children.
And I'll say this, Chris, and I can't speak for either of Blake or Sal, but I was one of the I left the church and left it for a good eight or so years, and had no intentions of coming back. The only reason I really came back to the church is by
always happens at the key moment.
The grace of God. I froze, right?
You froze, you did.
Okay. Am I back now?
You are.
Okay. So I gotta love my optimum internet here. It's very optimal. So yeah, so I'll just say that again. Basically, what I was saying is that I was one of the we. I left the church for a good 8 or so years, and but for the grace of God and the persistent love and support of my mom, who gave me enough room to do what I did without pissing me off and further pushing me away. But she also stayed with me and reminded me of God and the church, and would invite me to go, to her church with her, just to visit her old home church. And if it weren't for that, I don't know that I would have ever come back. And I think there's a point to that you're making, Chris, is that by and large, the boomer generation gave up on their, I think partly because the boomer generation came from the silent generation, where you tried to make the generation ahead of you have a better life than you did. And the boomers, part of the way of, I think their way of doing that was just giving more leeway to their kids, and they'll come back around when they have children.
I'd have to push back on that.
And the reason why I say that is because that's exactly what we see happening. We see, like you said, the boomers gave up on the Gen Xers and hoped that when they had kids, they would come back to church with the grandkids and bring the grandkids back. And if that didn't happen,
optimum is awesome. It really is.
Way to go. Well,
again, didn't I?
You did freeze up again. I would like to push back on that just a little bit, though. I mean,
sure,
you're right in that, the silent generation folks raised their baby boomers to always want to strive for something better for themselves. And baby boomers, they did that with their own children too. I mean, my parents always said, we, do better than us. Okay. But the thing is that their idea of what was better was work really hard, get enough money to be able to have that house, that 2-car garage, a pool in the backyard.
Yep.
And they were miserable in doing it. I remember watching my father coming home from a job that he really did not like, but he was doing it because it paid the bills. And lots of baby boomers, they stuck with those jobs, even though they hated them.
Oh, my dad's a casebook. Yeah.
My generation, we end up watching our parents and grew up watching them hating their jobs and coming back tired and complaining about their jobs. And then when my generation came around to finishing college and looking for work, we said, I don't want a job that I'm going to hate for the rest of my life. I want to get something that gives me some meaning and some happiness and some joy and some fulfillment. And so then we went off and we did things that made us happy,
right?
Which made our parents say, what the hell are these people doing?
Right.
I through schooling and stuff that I was doing, I ended up in the Middle East and get married there. And I was a school teacher teaching in the Christian school system there. Not that I was going to church, because I left the church when I went to college and was not looking back. And the only thing that brought me back was getting involved with the church on the mission level that made me be able to see the church in a very different light.
So how
And
does
real-
I have a question. How does that answer the fact, though, that by and large, and maybe it has to do with that they work themselves too thin, and I think that does have a lot to do with it, but how does that by and large answer the question of why did the boomer generation decide to let their children, by and large, and I remember this as a kid growing up, being made to go to church, very, very little, less and less kids were being made to go to church during that era, and that just continued to grow through the 90s and onward. Why did the boomers let their kids go and hope for their grandkids? I mean, that's what seems to me happened.
Yeah, and that is what happened. My father was born in 42 at the very, very tail end of the silent generation. My mother was born in 46, right at the very beginning of the baby boomer generation.
Yeah. My dad's 45.
Church was not a choice. You went to church, okay? But then a large segment of those were in the 60s who were rejecting the institution of the church. They were rejecting the institution of the government. They were they were rejecting all of these institutional forms of control. And the church was very, very much a part of that. And so many Generation X, when we get to the 80s and they're having, or not baby boomers rather, later baby boomers, when they're having their own kids in the 1980s, are not forcing the church down their throat as my parents, who were earlier in that generation, were. Okay, and so you started to have this weaning away from the church in the 1980s because those later baby boomers were also rejecting
that's what
that had been being put forth.
And that's what I was trying to get at in saying that those baby boomers, maybe not all of them, but I do think that part of what they thought was better was not forcing your kids to be in church.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
can I jump in?
Sure.
If I can jump in after you.
Sure.
You got it, Sal. No, Sal, you don't get to talk. You're sitting outside.
Dang it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think, Chris, again, correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm always ready to be wrong and learn something new.
Oh, same here.
One of the things that I'm seeing just from a church structure standpoint in the way, and I had a conversation with my new EP this week. She talked about a boomer pastor who retired, who confided in her and said, we did a really good job of making church members. We didn't do a good job of making disciples.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
And one of the things that I think about, my first memory of church, when you ask me my first memory of church is angry old people staring at the guy talking up front. Now, they weren't actually angry, but the face that I'm talking about, right? And, they were just getting through their public appearance for the week to be good church members. And I hated it. I didn't want anything to do with it until I went to summer camp, which, Chris, is a lot like your mission experience. We felt something that was actually seemed like the kingdom of heaven had actually drawn near a little bit. And that was compelling. The church was not.
Yeah, that's what brought me in.
And to bring it then to where we're at now, I'm getting hassled to get this 14-year-old confirmed. We got to get him. This woman, his grandma, talks to me about getting him confirmed every week in the handshake line. Yeah, great sermon. Get this kid confirmed. And I'm like, have you asked Mason if he wants to do that? Because if he does, let's do it, and let's do it right, and let's make it so that this is a faith that's meaningful to him. But I think that's kind of where I see the separation, where, there's generationally, it seemed like somewhere in the boomers, the Woodstock crowd was raised on duty, but broke free from it. But now they can't understand why their kids don't believe in duty.
Well,
Like
look,
duty to the church, and
Generation X, we became the first group that said, we're not going to church just because it's Sunday.
right.
If we're going to go to church, we want it to mean something, and we want there to be a reason behind it.
Right.
But before that, no, you went to church on Sunday because it was Sunday, and that's what you did.
What you did.
And so now we're getting grandparents that are trying to get their grandkids confirmed, even though the parents don't go to church, to try to get another crack at the duty cycle. Duty. Sal, you're up.
Speaking of duty, Dad.
No, I'm just fine. No, I had a similar experience to Blake. I mean, my mom was born in 43, my dad in 46, so they're prime examples of the Woodstock generation of baby boomers, sex, love, free love, and all that stuff. And I think my parents both. My mom was raised very strict Baptist. My dad was raised Roman Catholic. I think when they got married, they decided we're gonna not force that on our children. But at the same time, when we lived in Japan, my parents were good friends with the Navy chaplain. We would go to Easter and Christmas on the Navy base. So we were exposed to church, but it wasn't like a every Sunday exposure. Because they wanted us to choose our own path. And I remember vividly when we moved back to New Jersey in the late 80s, 87, 88. We didn't go to church. I think around 89, 90, we kind of started looking for churches, but nothing really came of it until 94 when Michael Blake, his Presbyterian church down the street, who was pastored by our neighbor, was doing confirmation classes, and part of that was a required trip to church camp. And that's where I became engaged and found, oh, this is something I want to do. So I don't know. I think that there's that weird generational thing where they didn't want to force it on us, but they also, my mom always wanted us to be exposed to it. My mom spoke at my ordination because she was a spiritual influence, albeit not a church influence. So my dad always used to joke that, my grandfather probably dunked me in the kitchen sink a couple of times because they refused to baptize us. I wasn't baptized until I got confirmed at 14.
Yeah.
So I think it's
that's an issue in my household, in which my grandson, who is now just turned 4 years old, has not been baptized. And my wife is from the Middle East. She's from Bethlehem, and has that very kind of almost baby boomer attitude towards duty in the church and doing and whatnot, is constantly arguing with me to baptize our grandson. And I constantly have to say to her, but it's not our decision. It's his parents' decision. And unless they are going to say, yeah, let's baptize our child, I can't just take him to church one day and dunk him and call it good. It doesn't work like that. In the Orthodox church where she comes from, it does work like that. And so that's why she's kind of, really hyper about that. But, issues of baptism, issues of confirmation, how many people are getting married in the church today?
Right.
People have given up on that even, when we were in South Jersey, a member of the church came to me and said, listen, I wanted to talk to you. My friends, they want me to marry them. So I need to get one of these online certificates, but what do you think? And I was just like, do not do it. Please do not do that. And she did it anyway, because that's what her friends wanted. And so the role of the church in the life of society has in so many ways gone astray. And it certainly did start with a certain segment of the boomer generation revolting against the institutions and so on, whereas my parents never revolted against anything. And I think the majority of boomers did not. And that's why so many of Gen Xers were raised in the church. But it started to thin out. And by the 80s, when my group was really coming of age, we really, what's the point? Why are we doing this? One, it's boring. It doesn't speak to us. It's, they don't listen to us anyway. So who cares? I remember my grandfather, one time he was saying something and I interjected and said, well, what about this? And he said, oh, be quiet. You're just a kid. You don't know anything. That was very much an attitude of our grandparents and some of our parents. And that just added to the, I don't want anything to do with what it is that you're doing. And then how many of us kind of throw our hands up in the air with our teenagers, realizing that we can't really tell them anything.
Oh yeah.
I can't tell my 6-year-old anything.
Well, good luck there.
Good luck when it gets older. When he or she gets older,
Yeah, Ada's gonna change the world, or she's gonna rule the world. There's going to be no in between.
Yeah. That's my Lorian too.
I probably am going to start. mean, I have just in kind of, I can't like back it up, but in my work as a chaplain, I'm seeing more and more people who aren't baptized. And I'm sure, you know, when I get asked to do these funerals, you know, I ask the family, oh, the only question I ask is, were they baptized? Because it makes a difference how I, as a Christian pastor, do the funeral. And I don't doubt I'm going to start seeing people who weren't, and it's going to affect how I do the service.
Oh yeah. And
but I've also
go ahead.
I've also experienced sort of how the boomers, Chris, you were saying they, and the older generation, the silent generation, of the whole structure, like this is the expectation and the structure and all that. For the first 5 years of my ministry, boomers could not understand how I could be a minister of word and sacrament and not have a church. It boggled their mind.
Right.
Well,
right.
here's the fun little secret. As you said, Chris, in 10 years, almost none of us will have a church and we'll still be ministers of word of sacrament.
Mhm.
Right. I'm preparing in whatever ways I can right now to not be a full-time pastor because I'm not going to make it. There's almost no way I'm going to retire that way because we want to be with family because that's what makes us happy. So we're going to move to Alaska and there's like 12 churches.
So you're going to have to do part-time and you could be a vocational pastor.
Gonna have to do something else.
Or
to hospice.
Or
take 2 churches.
we have a situation in which the church actually changes and really does do the things that need to be done. Now, you know, as dark as the future of the church in this country, I think oftentimes seems to everybody. At the same time, the church has had much darker times in the last 2,000 years.
Absolutely.
And
Hands
I
down.
think that there is always hope. And the church has had to change, has, you know, 500 years ago when we had the Great Reformation, you know, I mean, you know, there has, at the point of being pushed and prodded into it and put to the point of, you know, this doesn't work anymore, period, change takes place.
Well, the greatest Catholic
I
argument.
do think that we are in the point where we're at that point right now where there needs to be a massive reformation within inside of the church.
Absolutely.
And the church needs to become something that it has not been in the last generations.
Absolutely. And you all know this in ministry now, and Sally, including you as a chaplain, you all know the difficult road it is for pastors such as us who really see that we understand the bigger picture and what we need to do, but trying to convey that to the people who think that they've, you know, again, I hate to say this, but sometimes pastoring feels like the bad parts of parenting, right? Like where you have to sit down with your kids and say, I know you think you know it all, but you don't. You're missing the big picture here, and that's a hard uphill battle.
Grandparents.
Yeah.
Well, you're kind of seeing to that point of needing a change. You're kind of seeing that now with the younger millennials and whatever the next generation after millennials is called.
Z.
They want Z. They want that nourishment. They want.
Absolutely.
There is a desire for orthodoxy and for the ritual and the church. They just don't want it the way it's been.
And the boomer thing of contemporary worship is ancient now.
Yeah.
You might as well put that up with you know,
always,
like Martin Luther's hymns. I mean,
the church is always at least a generation behind in what the trends are. And I think maybe I see it more plainly because in chaplaincy, like I've said to other pastors, I fill that gap where I'm pastoring to your folks who don't come to church. I'm meeting people where they are, whereas, you know, not that you guys don't, but you know, you're kind of bound to what your church structure, ministry structure, whereas as a hospice chaplain, I'm going into the house and in places where some pastors never get to go. So I'm meeting these younger generations who are caring for their older Gen X and boomer parents at the time of death. And I'm providing more of a sense of what the church could be than their pastors ever did.
And that's 100% the case, Sal. I mean, I run into lots of those situations as well. But it just kind of reinforces in my mind that the church has got to be about truly inspiring and educating people about spiritual questions in their lives, because we all have them. We all have them. And it's not about the ritual. It's not about being there at Sunday at 9 o'clock and being sure that we're out of there at 10 o'clock. You know, that's not what it's about. And really it never should have been, but it became
Agreed.
about that. You know, when we were in South Jersey, there was this elderly gentleman. He was around 85 or so. And everybody told me, watch out for George. He's a stickler. And in years past, he would, if the service was running long, the service was always at 10:30, and at 11:30, if that service was not over, he would get up out of his seat. He would walk around the front of the church in front of the pew and walk out through the side door. And when he was passing the pulpit or passing the minister, wherever they were, he would tap his watch looking at them and walk out, because it was 11:30 and it was time to be done. And over the course of my time there, through Bible studies, through conversations, through book groups, through all different types of things that we were doing, he started coming around and seeing that it's not about just the ritual of doing what it is that we're supposed to do, but it is about the spiritual questions and what it is that we're getting out of this, and what is our relationship with the God that we believe in supposed to look like and be, and how are we supposed to react to that? And so in the last few years of his life, he started to get that, and then he actually ended up becoming my biggest supporter inside of the congregation, because he started to see that it had to all change. It had to be different. But
praise
it's
God
hard
for
because
people.
not all ministers are in that place of thinking as of yet.
No, they certainly aren't. And there are ministers, and probably a majority of them, who are boomers. So they're still of the boomer mindset. I mean, that's what the church is dealing with right now, in part, you know. And that's not to knock their ministry or what they do and the validity of the ministry that they do in the context that they do it, but a lot of them are not equipped to think in lines in terms of Gen X or beyond, really.
Yeah. I mean, most churches are still absolutely encapsulated by the idea of, we've got to really have an awesome VBS.
Yes, an awesome VBS and a great praise band. Or something like that. Yes. And neither of those, I mean, both of those can bring people in. I'm not saying they can't, but neither of those are going to create sustainable ministry that's going to last forever, you know. And that's the deal. Like we put band-aids rather than come up with, you know, ask the hard questions and come up with real solutions.
I think an important starting place in this conversation also is the realization that if we look around the world, the church is actually on fire. The church is growing by leaps and bounds.
The church ain't dying, that's for sure. It's growing.
It is not dying it by any stretch of the imagination.
It's just our lazy.
But within inside of our society, within inside of European society,
our complacent society. Yep.
Yeah.
Complacent, even though we shouldn't be in any level.
The thing that we made is dying, not the church.
Correct. The man-made institution in the Western church.
What we have decided church ought to be is the thing that is dying.
Yeah.
That's look at the history. The Western church was the center of Christianity for what, 1,200, 1,500 years, and now it's not. And so to us, it's dying, but to the world, it's growing.
If only people listen to that rascally Copenhagen guy by the name of Søren Kierkegaard back in the day when he said, Christendom is not Christianity.
Right.
Yeah.
And they hated him for it, but he was freaking right.
Well, hey guys, I gotta go full millennial and duck out early.
Okay. So
I got kids to pick up. So
you duck out.
You can have an all Gen X bonus episode.
Perfect.
Complain about the millennial shirking his duties.
Peace. Go back to the basement. No, kidding.
Good to see you, Chris.
See you later.
Good to see you too. Be well.
Yeah, so I guess this is unless you have anything else you want to bring up, we do have to mention that this is not just some research that Reverend Dr. Christopher Doyle has done, but that he actually has a published book you can go and purchase on Amazon and other places, I'm sure. It is called Responding Faithfully to Generation X, and I cannot read the subtitle. What is that?
Yeah, the subtitle is Why Gen X Rejected the Church en Masse, What It Means to the Future of the Church, and What We Can Do About It. Because I also, the last chapter, I really outline what it is that Gen Xers are looking for in the church, and how the church can respond to that in a way that could very easily invite them back in. And it's an important topic that really has to go beyond just the casual conversation after church on a Sunday morning.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I actually purchased the book. I will have you know, I haven't yet to read it, but I will be reading it. It is a topic of interest to me because again, many people my age have nothing to do with the church. You know, they have, and they are, I mean, like you said, the heart of Gen X is its cynicism. I mean, and it came out of, like you said, the Woodstock it came out of the boomers, especially the Woodstock generation that were questioning everything that carried on to us. But in carrying on to us, the questioning everything, we also started to question the things the boomers were doing, like going to church on Sunday. Why do we have to do that? What's the point of doing that?
Well, I would like to invite you then, especially if you already got the book, but in a couple of weeks, we're going to my churches that I'm serving now. We've had a book group ever since the pandemic came on. And trying to find ways to connect with each other and still be active. So we started a book group, and we've read just a whole ton of really great books, but we're going to be using this as our next book to read as a group and to be able to have the discussions around that. And so I would love to invite you to be a part of that.
I would love that.
We meet on Thursday evenings at 7:30 via Zoom. So it's very convenient. And I'm always looking to widen this conversation because I do believe that it is that important of one.
I can't promise I can be at every one, but if I can be there, I will be.
Yes, I will email you the link and keep you up to date as to where we are.
Please do. I would love to join that conversation because I do really, and that's why I was very excited when you had stated that you were going to be doing this as your doctoral, thesis. And, it's absolutely vital. I mean, we have entirely skipped, and we've skipped an entire generation. And what that equals, I mean, how long is a generation typically? Like 20 years or a little less?
Well, and this is actually, there's a massive discussion about that in the book, but typically generations have been 15 to 20 years. 15
to 20, right?
But
that's what I thought.
But there is an argument, and I really support the argument, and the argument has been put forth by other anthropologists, but that generations should not be kind of segmented by just random groups of years, but they should be grouped by experience. And so, that's why, baby boomers generally go from 46 after World War II finished until 1962, which is when the birth control pill came in and stopped the boom.
Hey, what do you know?
And stop the boom. And then you have this next generation coming in, which is me. Okay. And we're the generation that, we remember the 70s. Okay. I remember very, very well the whole Iran-Contra scandal. I remember seeing Ford on television. I remember when Watergate was a thing that they were still talking about. And then all of the changes that happened in the 1980s. In 79,
various different changes.
I was in 5th grade when Ronald Reagan won the election in 1980.
Wow.
And I remember very, very well the support that Reagan had. But then looking back on it, realizing how unaware people were as to what it was that the government was doing in the 1980s that literally changed so much for the worse in this country. And I know that I'll have pushback on that and people arguing with me. But if you really get into it and look at and see what it was that the government was doing at that point in time underneath that leadership, it was absolutely destructive.
Oh yeah.
And my generation ended up becoming the ones that really ended up having to carry so much of the brunt of what those policies were doing that were being carried out. It really caused a lot of my generation to just want to get away from it all. When I was living overseas, I remember talking to this guy. He was very close to the ambassador to Czechoslovakia when Czechoslovakia was still Czechoslovakia. And he was saying how in Czechoslovakia, one of the biggest problems that the government is having is what to do with all of the Americans my age who were moving to Prague and other places in Europe and teaching English and just not wanting to be in the US. And you know, I always say I missed the 90s. I completely missed the 90s. I wasn't here for any of it. You know, I to this day, I've never seen an episode of Seinfeld.
Good for you.
But I mean, that in certain respects was a very typical experience of Gen X because, you know, we were more interested in climbing the Himalayas than getting a job working for GE like our parents did. And it completely changed our outlook on life, but then also on the church. And that's something that has to be addressed, which is not typically at all by anybody.
No, Gen X is a lost generation.
But we don't have to be.
We don't have to be, right? There's no reason to be a lost generation. There's really no reason. Except that we've just said, screw them, you know, like in essence, I mean, maybe not in such words, but in essence, that's what we've said.
Yeah, very much so.
And then, you know, you take that, you know, forget the finer points of generations and whatnot, but you take that 15 to 20 year gap, throw that into the mix. And how does the church survive that gap? It doesn't, at least in the way we're doing things.
Yeah, the way we're doing things. I mean, that's why there has got to be a massive shift. And I mean, if you look at church history, the church has generally always gone through some type of massive change every 500 years.
Yeah.
You know, it started out as this house church and people gathering together in their homes.
Yep.
And then once they started gathering in churches, the church suddenly became institutionalized. And then suddenly it was the Holy Roman Empire. And then we had the Reformation, and now we're really ripe for another Reformation, and it has to happen.
And do you remember the argument of the Roman Empire overall against Luther's wanting, well, not just against Luther's questioning the doctrine of the church, but also the potential split that would happen? Their argument was that this is going to fracture and destroy the church. Well, it didn't. It did.
In certain respects, it did.
But it didn't in the big grand scheme of things. And I do agree that sometimes, there is a tearing down to build back up, but at the same time, that's necessary. I think it's necessary.
When we were in mission, with PCUSA and my wife and I, and every 3 years, the missionaries have to come back into the States and do what's called itineration, where we go around and we speak in churches and about our work and everything. And we came back into the States after 3 years, and we did 9 states in 3 months, just constantly traveling around. And at this church in Michigan, I was telling folks about what it was that I was doing and my work and everything. And a woman afterwards, she said to me, you know, I think it's marvelous what it is that you're doing, but you have to realize that the Middle East, Africa, South America, Asia, wherever, they are not the biggest mission field anymore. The United States is the biggest mission field, and we desperately need missionaries to come in and do this type of work here. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. But she was completely right. You know, so whereas we may see ourselves as pastors, parish pastors, and so on, we really do have to take the attitude of we are also missionaries. And that attitude really has to be brought into all it is that we are doing here in this country that desperately needs to not just hear the word, but they have to understand the word. And I think that
Absolutely.
once they understand it, there's a light bulb that will go on, and people will react and respond the way that will be beneficial to the way that the church needs to be.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
you can see that manifested in the growth of the Korean in both of our denominations. There's the growth of the Korean churches. We sent missionaries after World War II, and now they're sending them back. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
like we said before, the growth of the church is not in North America or Europe. It's everywhere else.
No, but that's the church throughout history, right? The church has never remained static or in one place as an epicenter. It has constantly spread and grown. And like we thought coming into America that we were going to be the city shining on a hill to the rest of the world of what a Christian nation should look like, which is kind of counter to anything that our founding fathers talked about. But this is, when the Puritans came, this is what they imagined their world to be. And it clearly was never that. And it's also arrogant to think that a church that has continually grown, moved, and changed is going to, suddenly be, you're going to be the bastion of that. So we're, as Americans and as Westerners, I think we're eating our humble pie right now.
Well, as it says in scripture, that the work is overwhelming and the workers are few.
And they always have been.
Yeah.
Jesus, when you look about how many disciples Jesus had, I mean, there were the 12, and he had more probably than just the 12 that were mentioned. But when you look at disciples to followers to people who just occasionally show up to listen because he's a famous person, you really have very few people working with him, and more people just coming to hear and then going off on their way saying we saw Jesus.
But hopefully in the time
they changed. planting seeds. And that's always been the work of the church, is to plant seeds and not base our success on human standards like numbers, but on impact and on what we're doing for the kingdom. I mean, that's always been the way we should measure it versus the way we have been measuring it, which has been a very worldly way. And our churches continue to propagate that. I'm in the middle of conference season right now, doing like how many people I baptized. If I baptize one, it's awesome.
And you know what, a lot of many of us are in smaller churches. The majority of churches are smaller churches. And so, on Sunday morning, we're still kind of coming back after the pandemic. We're streaming our services. And so we have a number of people that stay at home and watch the services. And so we'll have 25 to 30, maybe pushing 40 people in church on a Sunday. And people get very, very frustrated by that. Sure. Very frustrated. And I always have to tell them, take what it is that you get from here and go and plant it someplace else.
Absolutely.
And keep in mind that the church is always full.
Absolutely.
Because the church is not just the people who are physically here sitting and listening, but all there's the spirits of all of those people who have sat here over the course of many, many years, who are still here with us.
They are.
And so you really
Biblically
need to, you really need to always see the church is full. And I think that will help to change some of the attitude of frustration.
Stop being so damn pessimistic. Yes. Because anybody who has taken American church history or Western church history knows we're always in declension, always. Like every era is talking about how they're losing members. It just is the truth.
In 1932, the church that I served closed down for 3 years because there was nobody to come to church. And then in the mid-30s, in the heart of the Depression, they opened back up with a very tiny little fractured community. After World War II, they expanded. Obviously, people were, my grandfather, who was a part of the D-Day invasion, who was always involved in the church, but came back from World War II with a very new vigor for the church from what it was that they had seen, these examples of how horrible it is that we treat each other. And that the church and Christ and the word of Christ, the teachings of Christ, address how it is that we treat each other and how it is that we need to treat each other so that we cannot be such a bitter group of people toward each other and the world. And you know, we're in a downward slope right now. I don't know if we've pitted out at the bottom yet or not. I kind of don't think that we have, but there are things that can be done, I think, to reverse some of that. But it really does come with a major, there has to be a sea change with inside of the cultures. And you know, the most dangerous thing that I have heard and continue to hear at session meetings and within church groups is, but we've always done it that way.
Yeah.
You know,
Always.
people need to stop saying that, because that has, you know, Christ would never say, but we've always done it this way. He introduced something completely new.
Yeah,
And that's what it is
totally
that we
new.
have to be doing too.
Right. And Paul went from saying we've always done it this way to, hey, I'm going to do it new.
Yeah.
You know, like that was
Yeah.
the
And
conversion. Right.
we all have to be Paul.
We all have to be. Amen to that. Stop bitching about Paul. We all have to be Paul. I mean, granted, we can argue the finer points of his opinions on certain things if they were his opinions, but we need not argue against his spirit or what he did as a Christian. I mean, we need to be doing what Paul did, and that is opening our hearts to Christ and then following. And if people are going to judge us down the road, so be it. You know, okay, if it's due, it's due, but do the best you can for Christ, building the kingdom while you're here, and then you will enter the kingdom when you're not here, which will be here, which is very confusing.
Yeah.
But hey,
Yeah,
it's a mystery.
a discussion about Paul would be a wonderful topic for this, I think.
You know what, Chris? If and when, I should say, when we have a discussion on Paul, we'll bring you in on it.
I would love to be a part of that.
Me too. I'm very Pauline, so I would love to talk about that. And
Yes.
I know Sal is too.
Very much.
Yeah.
You take away Paul, you take away.
You take away the very
Well,
foundation
the
of
theology
what the
away
Gospels-
from the church.
And honestly, the Gospels were written post Paul, so the Gospels are informed by Paul as much as that is one thing that's always perplexed me, is that Paul's letters were circulating before some of them anyway, before those Gospels were written.
It boggles my mind when people say get rid of Paul, when if you did, you'd take away the theology of Jesus.
You wouldn't have your communion liturgy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was just explaining to some folks in Bible study how, you know, the Gospels tell the story of Jesus.
Yes.
Okay, and they tell us the lessons that Jesus was putting out there. Acts tells us the history of the early church, and Paul explains the lessons of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, and Paul is
so,
in the early church. Paul is in the early church. Yeah, he's the closest we've got.
Yeah.
Jesus, you know.
Well, you've got Peter, you've got Jude, you've got James, you've got John.
Yes.
Got,
if they are the historical authors, yeah.
Yeah.
But Paul may or may not have liked women. So there you go.
Well,
What was
he
that?
may or may not have liked women, but you know.
I would argue that he did like women, and that just certain things got included over time. Some of those letters were probably not even written by Paul, you know, so
I say that,
but maybe a
jokingly,
student of his or something. Yeah.
I say that jokingly because that seems to be the main.
That's the main
critique.
argument against him. He hated women, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
there's
which
no proof for.
I have to disagree with that.
I totally
also.
disagree with that.
You know, I mean, Paul may have said, women, you must honor your husbands, you know, in all that they do, but he also taught, which is what people oftentimes forget about, is that husbands, you need to treat your wives as Christ taught the church. Or Christ loved the church.
The church, right.
So I mean, you know, he was putting forth equality.
It was total
absolute equality. And you know, I know that people will say, oh, well, he was patriarchal and this and that. Well, of course he was. It was 2000 years
product of
ago.
his
How could
time.
how
We
could he
all
ever
are.
not be?
We all are. We're not patriarchal, but we're all a product of our time. Like we only know what we know.
Yeah.
And if
Hey,
you're going to judge him on that, we're screwed.
That's right.
I
Hey guys,
do-
I think we just kind of did our bonus thing.
Oh, Paul,
And there you go.
that's true. That's true. I actually had a really good idea for a bonus thing if you want to do it. Just because, well, here's the good idea for the bonus thing. Well, let's end this segment and then we'll talk about the good idea for the bonus thing. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
So with that said, all of you non-patrons, you might want to consider paying $5 a month to jump on and become a patron and find out exactly what we are going to be talking about, which we teased but did not share. And with that said, remember, be excellent to each other.
And don't be a jerk.
And on behalf of our fellow ghosts, Blake, Skull,
Cool.
rock on and take care.
Rock on.